To give definition to the energy body is the first step towards enlarging the parameters of perception. For those men and women of ancient Mexico, experts in dealing with awareness, to enlarge the parameters of perception meant entering into bona fide, all-inclusive new worlds. All-inclusive meant to them that those perceived new worlds were not mere concatenations of the mind, but worlds in which one can live and die. For them, entering into new worlds was the core of their magical expertise. Magic is a most inadequate term in this case, for it is loaded with insurmountable negative connotations. Those practitioners bypassed this negative slant by maintaining that their magic was merely a maneuver of perception. We have found out from our own experience that it is indeed a maneuver of perception, but a maneuver of such a magnitude that only the most daring and level-headed men and women can accomplish it.
Well, greetings again, and it is my honor to introduce the Chacmools. Here they are.
Good evening, Alan. Good evening, Estancia. Thank you for having us here tonight.
Good evening.
I am Kylie Lundahl. This is Naim Morez, and this is Rennie Morez.
Hello.
We're very happy to be here. Thank you. We are here tonight on your show because we would like to present you with a sample of movements that we practice. Before we do the demonstration of these movements, we would all three of us like, first of all, to tell you a little bit about who we are and how we came to practice these movements. 25 years ago, an anthropologist by the name of Castaneda wrote and published a book entitled The Teachings of Don Juan, a Yaqui Way of Knowledge. In that book, he described his experiences as an apprentice of a Mexican Indian sorcerer by the name of Juan Matus. Over the years, Carlos published 8 other books. These books dealt with different topics about his experiences as an apprenticeship with Don Juan. And because of that, his name and the name of his teacher, Don Juan Matus, became known worldwide. With that, all of Castaneda's books were translated into 17 different languages. For these last 25 years that we've been discussing here, Castaneda has refused the spotlight. He refused the spotlight under the premise that this anonymity that he would keep would allow him to continue his work without any social impediments. And he himself stated that Don Juan did succeed in convincing him of the validity and the seriousness of sorcerer's propositions. Don Juan Matus transmitted to Castaneda some knowledge. This knowledge was about perception. It was about the nature of perception. And he also transmitted to Castaneda information and knowledge about the key role that energy plays in perceiving and interpreting the world around us. Now, this knowledge was not an invention. This knowledge was the distilled accumulation of a millenary knowledge, the result of lifetime experiences of generations of sorcerers. There are 3 other disciples of Don Juan Matus's. That's Florinda Donner Grau, Taisha Abelar, and Carol Teagues. The 4 disciples of Don Juan Matus are the last remnants of an entire lineage of sorcerers. The 3 of us here tonight are the recipients of the knowledge that Don Juan imparted to those 4.
Good evening. I am Naim Morez. And the question has been asked from time to time, how did you come to be the recipients of this knowledge? And the story is not a linear one, but it begins, you could say, with when one of the 4 disciples of Don Juan Matus, Carol Teagues, became so involved in a particular aspect of the sorcerer's world that she was separated from her fellow disciples for a period of over 10 years. And upon finishing her task, she returned to them. And this return was a very dramatic event for them. Castaneda gave a lecture at a bookstore in Santa Monica, and Carol Teagues attended that lecture. She found out about the lecture completely by chance, and she had almost given up on finding Castaneda after her return. And so, naturally, Carlos Castaneda, he was very difficult to find, and she thought it would be impossible because he was very careful to maintain his inaccessibility. And when he saw her at this lecture, naturally, it was not something that he expected. As far as he knew, Carol Teagues had left for the duration of his life, and so according to him, the shock that he felt upon seeing her was indescribable. And the force of this event was so extraordinary for the sorcerers, the students of Don Juan, that it influenced them to do something that they call opening the doors of the sorcerer's world that had been before that closed. So, one consequence of this reappearance of Carol Teagues was our appearance, the three of us. And you could even say that Carol Teagues herself brought Rennie Merez, because Rennie also attended that same lecture and was sitting next to Carol Teagues. Kylie Lundahl came almost at the same time, and then I, Nai, came a little later. The sorcerers, when the three of us were together, it dawned on them that we were the guardian unit. That was a structural part of their tradition. And they call us Chacmools, which is a term that Don Juan used to make a link or a simile between the guardians, this guardian unit, and some stone figures that are found at the pyramids of Tula and Yucatan in Mexico. And the scholars often say that these figures are incense burners. Don Juan told his disciples that these figures were guardians of the pyramids as sites of power. The word Chacmool itself comes from a Mayan town of that name, but it's a name that is only used, the application of this name is particular to this generation of sorcerers. The original name for the guardians were the guardian warriors.
And good evening again. My name is Renata Merez, and our movements are called Tensegrity, which is a term borrowed from architecture, which refers to the internal balance attained through the compression and decompression, relaxation and tension of skeletal structures. We find this term most appropriate for our movements because basically a similar internal balance is attained in the human form through the relaxation and tension of muscles and tendons. Tensegrity is based on one of the cornerstones of the sorcerer's world, and this is basically what they call the magical passes. Don Juan Matus told his four disciples that the magical passes were not invented, but rather they were discovered. He also told his disciples that when the sorcerers went into dreaming, they could see that within the human form there was a special sort of mysterious binding force that held all the conglomerate of energy fibers together. Astronomers have said that there is a similar binding force that holds the universe together. Without this force, the universe would dissipate. Don Juan Matus says that this also would happen to the human form without this binding force. The sorcerers of ancient Mexico found this binding force extremely important to them, and they found that by doing certain movements, they could call their attention at will to this binding force. Oh, okay, to this binding force. This became very important to them because because basically if they could call their attention to this binding force, they could change, alter, and do whatever they wanted with their beings. The three of us here have worked with Carlos Castaneda and his disciples for about 7 years, and let me see, for about 7 years, and we have basically attempted to, how do you say, not transform, but take Tensegrity out of the realms of the ancient sorcerers. The ancient sorcerers, when they used Tensegrity, was shrouded in darkness, secrecy,
Let's show one of the movements on tape,
Surely.
and then we'll come back and talk a
Okay.
little more about it.